Blood and expensive cologne smell exactly the same when you've been around them long enough. I knew the rules. Keep your head down. Pour the drinks. Never look at the men who run the city. But Vincent didn't play by the rules, and tonight I was the prize. The neon sign outside the Continental hummed a steady, dying note, casting a sickly red bleed across the wet Chicago pavement. Inside, the air was thick. Cigars, stale gin. The sharp, alkaline tang of adrenaline that always seemed to leak off the men in the back booths. I wiped down the mahogany bar for the third time. It didn't need it. The rag was damp with warm water and a splash of soda water, cutting through the sticky residue of spilled grenadine and careless wealth. I kept my eyes on the grain of the wood. It was a survival tactic. If you didn't look at them, they usually didn't look at you. Usually. My feet ached in low black heels. 2:30 in the morning. We had officially closed at 2, but closed was a fluid concept when the Moretti family occupied the VIP section. There were 5 of them tonight, 4 loud ones and Vincent. Vincent didn't need to be loud. He was the gravity in the room. When he shifted his weight, the other men stopped talking. When he picked up his glass, they watched to see if they should drink. He wore a dark wool suit that fit him with the kind of precision that cost more than my apartment. But it was the way he wore it that mattered, like armor, like a threat. I tossed the rag into the sink under the counter. The water hit the stainless steel with a hollow thud. Nora. The voice was low. Coarse sand dragged over velvet. It didn't carry across the room, but it didn't have to. I heard it in my spine, before my ears registered the sound. I turned. Vincent was standing at the far end of the bar. I hadn't heard him get up from the booth. He moved like that, a shadow detaching itself from the darker corners of the room. He wasn't a large man, not in the bouncer thick way of his enforcers, but he took up all the oxygen anyway. His eyes were a flat, unreadable slate gray. "Mr. Moretti," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. I walked over, keeping a polite, professional distance. "Something else to drink?" He looked at me. Really looked. It was a gaze that stripped away the uniform, the polite smile, the careful distance. It saw the exhaustion in my shoulders. It saw the way my hands were slightly chapped from the industrial soap. "You're tired," he said. It wasn't a question. "It's late. It's the end of a shift." "I told the manager you finish at 2, regardless of who is here. I am the manager, Vincent, and I don't leave until the register is closed." I used his first name. A slip. Or maybe not. Over the last 6 months, a strange, terrible quiet had settled between us whenever he came in. He didn't flirt. He didn't touch me. But he watched. And the other men, sensing the invisible tripwire, learned quickly to order their drinks from the other bartenders. I belonged to Vincent's line of sight. And in this world, sight was ownership. Vincent reached into his coat. My breath hitched, a primal instinct I couldn't completely train away. But he only withdrew a silver money clip. He peeled off $300 bills and laid them flat on the sticky mahogany. "Go home, Nora." "I don't need a tip to leave. I need the floor cleared so the busboys can vacuum." He stared at the money, then at me. "It's raining. Take a car." Before I could argue, a loud bark of laughter echoed from the back booth. Dante. Dante was new money, new blood, and recently made Capo. He was 30, wore suits that were a little too flashy, and had a smile that felt like a switchblade clicking open. He was reckless. You could see it in the way he drank. The way he leaned too far over the table, the way he looked at the waitresses. He was a dog who hadn't been kicked hard enough yet. "Vince," Dante called out, his words slurring slightly at the edges. "We moving or what? The night's young." Vincent didn't look at him. His eyes remained locked on mine. Slowly, deliberately, he tapped his index finger against the polished wood of the bar. Once, twice. A metronome of patience running thin. "I'll have a car waiting out front," Vincent said quietly to me. "Don't take the train." "I take the train every night." "Not tonight." He finally turned away, walking back to the booth. The air around me instantly felt colder. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding and started ringing up the final receipts. The numbers blurred a little on the screen. I was exhausted, cynical, and entirely too old to feel the strange flutter in my chest just because a violent man told me to take a cab. He wasn't a savior. He was a shark telling a minnow to swim a different route. I punched in my employee number to close out the till. Behind me, the scrape of chairs against the hardwood signaled the departure of the Moretti crew. Finally. By the time I grabbed my wool coat from the break room locker, the main floor was mostly empty. The busboys were flipping chairs onto the tables, the legs pointing toward the ceiling like dead insects. The music was off. The only sound was the hum of the ice machine and the heavy drumming of rain against the front windows. I shrugged into my coat, adjusting the collar against the chill. I just wanted my bed. I wanted to scrub the smell of gin and expensive smoke out of my hair. I pushed through the swinging doors into the front foyer. The exit was right there. Just 10 feet of cheap carpeting between me and the wet Chicago air. "Leaving so soon, sweetheart?" I froze. The voice came from the alcove near the coat check. Dante stepped out of the shadows. He had a lit cigarette between his lips, the cherry glowing bright orange in the dim light. He took a drag and let the smoke curl out of his nose. Up close, he smelled of sour mash whiskey and sweat. "My shift is over, Dante," I said, keeping my tone flat. "Don't show fear. Don't show irritation. Just be a wall. Shame." He took a step closer. The foyer was small. Too small. "Vince is outside dealing with the valet. Figured I'd wait where it's dry. But now that you're here..." He looked me up and down. It wasn't the way Vincent looked at me. Vincent looked at me like he was trying to figure out how I worked. Dante looked at me like I was something on a menu. "Excuse me," I said, stepping to the left to bypass him. Dante stepped left, blocking my path. He didn't touch me, but he didn't need to. The proximity was a physical weight. "Come on, Nora. You're always rushing off. What's waiting for you in that crappy little apartment of yours anyway?" He leaned in. "I know Vince has a thing for you. Everybody knows. He watches you like a hawk. But Vince, he's cold, you know? He's a businessman. I bet you're tired of businessmen." My heart started a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Fight or flight. But fighting a Capo meant ending up in the river, and flight was currently blocked by 190 pounds of arrogant muscle. "Move, Dante, please." He chuckled. A wet, ugly sound. He took his cigarette out of his mouth and flicked the ash onto the carpet. "Can I walk you out?" The Capo smirked. It was a loaded question. It meant, can I put my hands on you? Can I assert dominance over my boss's territory? Can I see what I can get away with? "No," I said sharply. His smirk widened, exposing teeth. He reached out, his hand coming toward the lapel of my coat. "Oh, come on, let me just..." Click. The sound was tiny, metallic, Absolute. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the white noise of the rain and the humming ice machine, like a thunderclap. Dante froze. His hand stopped 3 inches from my chest. I didn't move. I couldn't. Vincent was standing in the doorway of the vestibule. Rain darkened the shoulders of his suit. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and in his right hand, leveled dead at Dante's chest, was a Glock 19. The safety was off. The silence that followed was suffocating. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop violently. I stopped breathing. Vincent didn't yell. His arm didn't shake. His eyes were entirely dead. It was the face of a man who was no longer calculating, but executing. "Take a step back, Dante," Vincent said softly. Dante's smirk vanished. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a waxy, sickly gray in the dim light. He slowly raised his hands, palms open. The cigarette dropped from his fingers, burning a tiny hole into the cheap foyer carpet. "Vince," Dante choked out. His voice cracked. The bravado evaporated in a millisecond, replaced by a raw animal terror. "Vince, hey, we were just talking. I was just being polite. Step back." Vincent's voice barely rose above a whisper, but the command was absolute. Dante scrambled backward, stumbling over his own feet until his back hit the paneled wall near the coat check. Vincent walked slowly into the room. He didn't look at me. His focus was entirely on the man against the wall. The gun remained steady, an extension of his own arm. "Polite," Vincent tasted the word, finding it foul. "You were offering to walk her to her car." Yes. Just out to the street, Vince. Swear to God." "She doesn't like you," Vincent said. It was a simple statement of fact. "She doesn't want you near her, and you put your hands in her space." "I didn't touch her." Dante's chest heaved. He was staring at the black barrel of the gun. "Vince, I'm a Capo. You're gonna pull a piece on a Capo over a fucking bartender?" The muzzle flashed upward, just an inch, catching the red neon light from the street. "Don't call her that," Vincent breathed. My stomach dropped to the floor. The reality of the situation hit me like physical blow. He wasn't just warning Dante. He was genuinely deciding whether to pull the trigger. Right here, in the entryway of my restaurant, the mess, the police, the blood. "Vincent." I didn't know I was going to speak until the word left my mouth. My voice was shaky, thin, breaking the terrible tension in the room. His eyes flicked to me for a fraction of a second, just enough to acknowledge I was there. "He didn't touch me," I said, forcing the words out past the knot in my throat. "I'm fine. Let him go." Vincent stared at Dante for 3 long, agonizing seconds. The muscle in his jaw feathered. The violence in him was a living thing, straining against a leash. Finally, with terrifying slowness, he lowered the weapon. He didn't holster it. He just held it down by his side. "Get out," Vincent told him. "Walk home in the rain. If I see you looking at her again, if I hear you speak her name, they'll find you in pieces in the trunk of a stolen car in Gary. Do you understand me?" Dante nodded frantically, his eyes wide. He didn't say another word. He pushed past the velvet ropes, threw open the heavy front door, and practically ran out into the pouring rain. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone with a man holding a loaded gun. Vincent exhaled slowly. He clicked the safety back on with his thumb and slipped the weapon back into the holster beneath his jacket. The movement was practiced, seamless. He finally turned to look at me. The deadness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something heavier, something almost frantic. "Are you hurt?" he asked, stepping toward me. "No." I took a half step back. A reflex. He stopped instantly. He saw the movement. He saw the fear. A flicker of something painful crossed his face before he locked it down behind his usual stoic mask. "The car is outside," Vincent said quietly. "I'll follow you home, just to be sure." I looked at the spot where Dante's cigarette was still smoldering on the floor, then back at Vincent. He had just threatened to murder one of his own top men for standing too close to me. I wasn't just a bartender to him anymore. I was a vulnerability. And in his world, vulnerabilities usually ended up dead. "Okay," I whispered. I walked out the door into the freezing rain, feeling the absolute weight of the crosshairs settling onto my back. The back of the Lincoln Town car smelled faintly of leather cleaner and stale peppermint. I stared out the rain-streaked window, watching the blur of the city melt into distorted streaks of amber and white. True to his word, 2 car lengths back, a black SUV kept pace. The headlights were a constant burning presence in the side mirror. My hands were still shaking. I tucked them under my thighs, pressing down hard to force the tremors to stop. It didn't work. Adrenaline is a stubborn chemical. It doesn't care that you're safe, only that you weren't. We pulled up to my building in Logan Square. It was a brick 4 flat that had seen better decades, let alone days. The driver threw the Lincoln into park, but before I could even reach for the heavy door handle, the back door opened from the outside. Vincent stood on the curb. The rain was coming down in sheets now, drumming violently against the roof of the cars, but he didn't seem to notice. He held a large black umbrella over the open door, sheltering me. I stepped out. The chill of the October night bit through my damp wool coat immediately. "You didn't have to get out," I said over the noise of the rain. He didn't reply. He just closed the car door with a solid thud and motioned toward the building's entrance with his chin. "Lead the way." "Vincent, it's fine. I'm home." "The door, Nora." His tone left no room for negotiation. I turned and walked up the 3 cracked concrete steps. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers stiff and uncooperative. He stood right behind me. I could feel the heat radiating off him in the freezing air, smell the distinct scent of wet wool and cedar. The deadbolt clicked, and I pushed the heavy glass door open. I started up the stairs. The carpet in the stairwell was a tragic, faded floral pattern that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and old dust. I heard his heavy, measured footsteps ascending behind me. He was totally out of place here. A wolf pacing through a petting zoo. When we reached the 3rd floor, I unlocked my apartment door and reached inside to flip the light switch. "Wait in the hall," he said, catching the door before I could push it fully open. "What? Why?" "Humor me." He stepped past me into the dark apartment. I stood in the hallway, clutching my keys, feeling incredibly foolish. I listened to the sound of him moving through my small space. The squeak of the hardwood in the living room. The slide of the closet door in the bedroom. The squeal of the bathroom pipes as he pushed the shower curtain back. He was clearing the apartment, checking for ghosts, or checking for Dante. A minute later, the living room lamp clicked on, casting a warm yellow glow through the doorway. Vincent appeared in the hall and stepped aside. "Clear," he said. I walked in, dropping my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. The apartment was exactly as I had left it. A stack of mail on the tiny kitchen island. A throw blanket bunched up on the cheap gray sofa. It was a modest, quiet life. And suddenly, standing in the middle of it, Vincent looked too large, too sharp. The violence that hung around him like a cloak was jarring against the backdrop of my mundane existence. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, looking down at the street through the slats of the cheap plastic blinds. "You can go now," I said. I sounded exhausted. I felt it too. A deep, bone-weary ache that had nothing to do with the physical labor of my shift. He turned. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the small stack of paperback books on the coffee table, the dying pothos plant on the windowsill. He was cataloging my life. "I caused a problem tonight," he said. His voice was low, devoid of its usual commanding edge. "You pulled a gun on a man in my lobby," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "Yes, I'd say that's a problem. Dante is an animal. He tests boundaries. If I had just told him to back off, he would have waited until I wasn't looking. He would have found you." "So you threatened to kill him?" "I didn't threaten him." Vincent's gaze met mine, steady and dead serious. "I gave him a choice. He chose to walk away." The distinction was terrifying. He meant it. "What happens now?" I asked. My throat felt tight. "He's your capo. Oh, your people don't just forget things like this. They don't like being humiliated." Vincent slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket, letting it hang open. He looked tired. For the first time since I'd known him, the impenetrable armor seemed to crack just a fraction. "My people respect strength," he said. Dante overstepped. He put his hands on something that isn't his. The men will see it as discipline. Dante will see it as a warning. He paused, his jaw tightening. "But you're right. It complicates things." "Because of me." "No, because of me," he corrected gently. He took a step toward me, stopping when he saw my shoulders tense. He held his ground, keeping a careful distance. "I shouldn't have been watching you. I shouldn't have let them see that I care. In my world, you don't broadcast what you value. It makes it a target." The word hung in the air between us. Value. I looked down at the scuffed toe of my boot. "I'm just a bartender, Vincent." "Don't do that," he said softly. "Don't pretend you don't know." I looked up. He was staring at me with a raw, unprotected intensity that made my chest physically ache. "I know what I am," Vincent continued, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I know the things I've done, the things I have to do. I bring blood and noise everywhere I go. But when I sit at your bar," he swallowed hard, "when you pour a drink, and you complain about the ice machine, and you tell that idiot bouncer to stop leaning on the glass, it's the only quiet I have left." I didn't know what to say. You don't expect a monster to confess that he likes the way you organize the napkins. You don't expect him to crave your ordinary life. "I'll make sure Dante is moved to the Southside operations. You won't see him again," Vincent said, pulling his coat closed. The armor was sliding back into place. The vulnerable man was disappearing, replaced by the boss. "Lock the deadbolt and the chain." He walked past me to the door. "Vincent," I called out. He stopped, his hand on the brass knob. He didn't turn around. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded once, a stiff, jerky movement, and walked out into the flickering hallway. I closed the door behind him and slid the chain into place. I stood there for a long time, listening to his heavy footsteps fade down the stairs, wondering why the apartment suddenly felt so incredibly empty. 3 days passed. The bitter lake wind rattled the cheap glass of the Continental's front windows, But the inside of the bar was dead. The Moretti crew hadn't shown their faces. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt like a drawn-out breath before a dive. On Thursday, at 1 a.m, the heavy oak door finally opened. I looked up from the register. It was just Vincent. No entourage. No impeccably pressed suit. He wore a heavy black pea coat, collar turned up, and he moved with a stiff, deliberate drag on his left side. As he stepped into the amber light of the bar, I dropped my towel. His bottom lip was split down the middle, sealed with a crust of dried blood. A swollen, plum-colored bruise warped his sharp jawline. He walked past the empty VIP booths and sat directly in front of my station. "Bourbon," he rasped. My hand shook as I reached for the bottle. I poured 2 fingers and slid the glass across the mahogany. As he reached for it, the overhead light caught his knuckles. The skin was split wide open, raw and red. "What happened?" I asked. He swallowed the whiskey in one go. It didn't even make him wince. "A restructuring in management." I stared at his battered hands. "Dante, he didn't agree with his transfer," Vincent said flatly. His slate-gray eyes met mine, entirely hollow. "He thought he could prove a point. He's gone." The finality in his tone chilled me. Not transferred, buried. I walked into the back room and grabbed the first aid kit from above the safe. When I returned, he hadn't moved an inch. I stepped around the bar and stood between his parted knees. He went completely still. I tore open an alcohol wipe. "This will sting." I pressed it to his cheek. He didn't flinch, but I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "You fought your own Capo over me," I whispered, swiping away the dried blood. "Do you realize what people are going to say?" "Let them talk." His voice was a low rumble against my ribs. "I only care that you can walk to the train without looking over your shoulder." "I'll always have to look over my shoulder now, Vincent. You made sure of that." He caught my wrist. His bruised fingers were gentle, but the grip was absolute. "I know," he said, the sorrow in his eyes sudden and devastating. "I made you a target. If you tell me to leave, I will. I'll put 10 men outside your building to make sure you live a safe, boring life, and you will never see me again." He let my wrist go, letting his hand drop to his thigh. The choice was mine. I looked at the blood on his face, the violence he wore like a second skin. A safe life meant a quiet, empty apartment. I didn't want it. I reached up, tangling my fingers in the thick hair at the nape of his neck, and pulled his face to mine. He let out a ragged breath as our lips collided. He tasted of copper and expensive whiskey. His arms banded around my waist, pulling me against his chest with a desperate, crushing weight. I kissed him back, anchoring myself to the monster who had burned down his own house just to keep me warm. If you felt the tension in this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more grounded, dark romance. The world of the Mafia isn't just about the violence. It's about the quiet moments, the unspoken rules, and the deadly consequences of falling in love with the boss. Share this video with someone who loves a protective, morally gray anti-hero. Drop a comment below. What would you do if Vincent was waiting in your lobby? See you in the next one.